Hi, good morning, Will. Thank you for joining us for our DKJ
Hi,
Health
Kiran.
Hub question and answer session. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my name's Will Ellis. I'm the managing director here at BW Healthcare Surveyors. So we are a specialist firm of primary care surveyors. So we assist practices with a wide variety of different premises related matters from rent reviews ensuring that practices are receiving the correct rent or make sure they're not overpaying the landlords. For example, we'll do things like market valuations for partnership changes. If partners are wanting to leave and sell to other partners, we'll determine what the value of that premises is. We do things like sale and lease back as well. Pharmacy rent reviews is something else we assist practices with, but really, I guess we're just a one-stop shop for practices with any assistance they want with primary care, with primary care premises. Any questions that they have, we always say that if we can't assist them with something, we'll certainly know somebody who can. We'll be able to point them in the right direction. So we're just here really to offer as much help and support as we can to practices all over the UK.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Will. So today what we're going to be talking about is rent reviews for
Yep.
GP premises. So first question, again, back to basics. What are rent reviews?
Okay, fine. So I guess the first question is it depends on whether practices are in owner occupied premises, so in premises that they own themselves, so they're owned by the GP partners, or if they lease from an external landlord, perhaps an ex-GP owns the premises or an organisation or NHS Property Services. So there's kind of two different types of rent reviews. When we're talking about it from an owner occupied point of view, it's tend to become as a notional rent review, and it's really just a rent that the NHS will pay the practices for operating from that building, from operating services from the building. So it's a rent that is paid by the NHS to the practice. That rent is kind of assessed every 3 years, to make sure that rent is correct and in line with the current market. And it's reviewed by somebody called the district valuer. And then there are surveyors like ourselves that just assess that and make sure that rent is correct and in line with the current market. But all practices will receive rent reimbursement, or at least they should. There are some that don't, but that's a separate matter entirely. But all practices who provide GMS services, if they're on a GMS contract, will receive rent reimbursement. So if they're in owner occupied, it's notional rent. If they're in a leasehold premises, it'll come through as actual rent. So it's slightly different. When you're in an owner occupied premises, it basically gets paid to you. You get to keep it and use it for premises related matters, upgrades and improvements and things. When you're in a leasehold premises, you receive it still from the NHS. The NHS will still pay it as an actual rent, but you have to then pay that to the landlord. So you're not going to benefit financially from a rent review, from receiving that rent. When you're in a leasehold premises, you then have to pay that to the landlord. So the landlord will charge you a rent. Let's say it's £100,000 a year. And then the NHS will pay that £100,000 a year. There shouldn't be a shortfall. There shouldn't be a difference between those two values. Sometimes there is. So sometimes you will find that you're paying perhaps the landlord more than what you're receiving, but that really depends on the terms of the lease. That shouldn't be the case. And if you are paying more, it's probably worth getting independent advice from surveying firm just to find out why there is a shortfall between what you're getting from the NHS and what you're paying to the landlord.
Amazing. Oh, that makes a lot of sense then. So there's two types of rent reviews that you can do as well. So in terms of practices, why should they do it? What are the benefits of having a rent review done by surveyors like yourselves?
Well, look, the rent reviews are done automatically by the district valuer anyway. So the district
Yeah.
valuer acts on behalf of the ICB or the NHS,
Right.
or the health. It would be the health board surveyor in Wales, acting on behalf of the health board. So they'll have somebody come out and give their opinion of what the rent should be. I would say from our perspective, it's important to get a second opinion just to make sure
Right.
that their assessment is correct. Everyone can make mistakes,
Yeah.
and practices, district values can go out. They've perhaps mismeasured something, they've forgotten to include a room, or they've just valued it incorrectly. They've not counted the correct number of car parking spaces. I mean, we've had practices before where there's been whole floors missed. So the practice is over 2 floors, a ground floor and a first floor, and the district valuer acting on behalf of the NHS has never realised that it's there's a first floor there. So practices have only ever been reimbursed for their ground floor, and then they've had a second opinion, and then once that second opinion has been given, they've obviously had a huge increase in their rental income. So it's very, very important for practices to get a second opinion. From our point of view, we did some research about 12 months ago, and we realised around 89% of practices that we've inspected are underfunded. So that means nearly 9 out of 10 practices that we go out to aren't receiving the right rent. So it's so important. And again, as surveying firms, we kind of work on a basis where we can do all that for them free of charge, and they wouldn't pay us anything unless we get them an increase. And that's not just ourselves. That's kind of a lot of the companies in the market do something similar. So practices don't really have anything to lose in getting a second opinion, because worst case scenario, a surveyor is going to go out, tell them that the rent is correct, and they're not going to pay anything. It's a free service.
Okay.
So I think it's just so vital that practices get that second opinion, and it's relatively quick as well. We can do a free assessment within 24 hours just based on the report that they send through. The next stage to that might be that we'll need to go and inspect, and that process can take a little bit longer. But that initial report stage, that initial assessment, is completely free of charge, and like I said, it takes 24 hours. We can turn that around very, very quickly. I think it's just really important. And then from there, so that's if they're in an owner-occupied premises, if they're receiving notional rent. If they're receiving rent from the landlord, it's actually potentially less important that they got independent advice, because they should have protection in the lease that says the rent is fully reimbursed. And actually, if that's the case, they won't necessarily need input from a surveyor. It should be the landlord's responsibility to negotiate directly with the district valuer from the NHS to make sure those two rents are the same. And they should actually potentially just cut the GPs out. So actually, when they're in a leasehold premises, it's probably not as important to get independent advice. It's still important to get it, because they need to make sure they've got those necessary protections in the lease. And actually, because of the changes in the premises cost direction, so the new premises cost directions came out May last year, and that effectively governs how the premises should be valued from a notional rent, from a rent perspective. And they can be a little bit ambiguous. And I think some ICBs are interpreting the new rules that actually the practices have to get now independent advice. We don't personally believe that's correct interpretation, but if the ICBs are interpreting it that way, then it may be a case that the ICBs insist on them getting independent advice. But again, that's just worth practices having a conversation with the ICB to see how they're interpreting the rules, see if they actually need somebody, and probably just speaking to a surveying firm, getting them to assess the lease that they have in place and the rent review notice they've received from the landlord, just to make sure that they've got the necessary protections and they can actually just leave the landlord and the district valuer to negotiate between themselves. So yeah, two very different scenarios. Hugely important if you're in an owner-occupied premises to get a second opinion and to probably challenge it. Less so in a leasehold premises, but still just make sure you get that initial advice to make sure you've got the necessary protections in the lease.
Fantastic. So I suppose my final question is okay, you convinced us we need to get this done, we need to have a look at a rent review. How do we get started?
Well, the first thing, if you're in a leasehold premises, my first thing to say is don't worry about it. You're not going to benefit anything financially from having a rent review. So leave it up to the landlord. Leave it up to the landlord to get in touch. If the landlord gets in touch and sends you through a rent review notice, then just send it through to someone. Either send it through to the ICB to see how they want to deal with it, or if you've got a retained surveyor, send it through to your surveying firm so they can review it, see if you need any help. Or if not, send it through to us. We can actually assess it for you free of charge. We can have a look at the lease free of charge. We can have a look at the rent review notice free of charge, and just let you know what the next best steps are. Whether that's, yes, you need to use our services because you don't have protection in the lease, or that might be, don't worry about it. Send this to the ICB. You don't need our assistance. The district valuer and the landlord can negotiate directly. So if you're in a leasehold premises, effectively wait for the landlord to instigate the review. I potentially wouldn't be doing anything at all, wouldn't be wasting my time trying to chase that up. If you're in an owner-occupied premises, again, you can leave it up to the NHS and the ICB to organise the review. They will get round to it eventually, but they're not always the quickest in organising these things. They fall quite far behind with their rent reviews. So I would probably say it's worth being a little bit proactive if you're in an owner-occupied premises, and probably chasing the NHS, reminding them that you're due a review, chasing the kind of the CMR1 forms, which is an Excel document that comes through where practices have to fill in and answer questions about the surgery and what's changed since the last review. That's kind of the first stage of the process. And I think it's just important practices are very, very proactive with it. Chase the NHS for the reviews, for the district valuer to come out to visit. And then as soon as they have that report, the report that tells them what notional rent they're going to be getting, is just important to just fire that off to an independent surveyor, get them to check it, get them to see if it's correct and in line with the current market, really.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Will. Really appreciate that. I feel like I know much more about rent reviews now as well.
Right.
Thank you ever so much. And if you want more information, you can go to BW Healthcare Surveyors website or look at their LinkedIn page, or you can contact us via our DKJ Health Hub as well. Thank you so much, Will.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kiran.